It's 10 o'clock on Wednesday, the 3rd of March, in the year of our lockdown 1. So welcome to today's presentation from U3A Helderberg. Good morning to you all from here in Somerset West. I'm Richard Tompkins, the current chairperson of U3A Helderberg and your host for the presentation. And of course, a special welcome to all our visitors viewing with us. We owe thanks to our studio director today, Johan Rothman, who is coordinating proceedings. We're presenting on YouTube via the program StreamYard. For novices to this medium, we cannot see or hear you, but there is a live chat area where questions to the speaker can be typed during the presentation. Bearing in mind time constraints, Johan will select those of your questions that could be of general interest and show them on everyone's screen. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker, University of Cape Town Professor, now Emeritus, Anwar Suleiman. By way of background, he is a medical biochemist by training and among many appointments was Professor of Surgical Research in the Division of General Surgery. His topic today is entitled The Complex Life of the Gut, Our Second Brain. If you ever had a gut feeling or had to make a decision or felt butterflies in your stomach when nervous, you're likely getting signals from an unexpected source, your second brain. Hidden in the walls of the digestive system, this brain in your gut is revolutionizing medical understanding of the links between digestion, mood, health, and even the way you think. Please put away the Rennies, and on that note, over to Professor Mall.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to you. And thank you for that introduction. So I'm going to talk to you about the gut-brain axis, why the gut is the second brain. So let's get a definition clear. What do we mean by gut? Is it the same as the gastrointestinal tract or system, or the alimentary canal, or the digestive tract or system, or the bowel? So it's largely the same. You can call it the gut, or you can call it any one of the other names I've mentioned. Now, what do we mean by gut? We mean that the gut is the hollow organs that make up this whole gastrointestinal tract, which starts at the mouth and continues into the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and the anus. And here's a lovely picture on the left-hand side, starting from the mouth and going all the way down to the anus. The liver, the pancreas, and the gallbladder are also solid organs of this. So you have the pancreas there, you have the liver there, you have the gallbladder there. And so that makes up the gut. But there are some people in other centers in the world which prefer just referring to this part as the gut, the large bowel. But it's not absolutely cast in stone. So when I talk of gut today, I'm going to be talking about the entire system from the mouth to the anus. But eventually, as the talk proceeds, we will be focusing largely on the large bowel. Okay, so why is the gut now thought of as a second brain? Here's the brain on the left of the screen. And all of you probably have seen this picture. And then when you think of the gut on the right, there is no resemblance. So why is it the second brain? And that's a very good question. So I'm going to now take you to Professor Simon Carding of Norwich Medical School, who has become very involved in this idea of a gut-brain axis. And he says that the gut is the inner tube of life. It stretches from the mouth to the anus, as I said. It's 9 millimeters long. It has a surface area of a badminton court. It's not a smooth tube in most parts. There are many finger-like projections to capture nutrients, the food we eat, and absorb them into the blood. And that happens in the small intestine here. And that was Simon Carding. Now, If I were to actually, while you were standing, cut across you, so I would be actually cutting you in half, and you'll have the gut looking like this. It would be like a tunnel in which you could walk through. And if you walked through the gut, you will see these finger-like projections, which actually accommodate the gut size, but compact it so it can all fit into your body. And behind those finger-like projections, there are many layers. And I want to just bring your attention to this layer here, which says submucosal plexus of Meissner and the myenteric plexus of Auerbach. That's where the nerves lie of the gut, and that's where they enter the gut at these two layers. Now, let's just get back to some basics. We know that we all made of atoms. All matter in this universe is made of atoms, and physicists study that. And atoms form molecules. 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen will form water, right? Now, when that happens, and the chemists tell you all about it, when that happens, the properties of water would be totally unpredictable from hydrogen and oxygen alone. But when they combine, you get a new substance, something you can drink. I live by the sea. I get up every morning and I admire the ocean. That's water, hydrogen and oxygen. And so each level of complexity that is on this, each level of complexity that's on this slide is unpredictable from the previous layer. So when you get molecules that make big molecules like the molecules that make us, protein, lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, vitamins, ions, and water, they rearrange themselves to form cells, which is the basic unit of living matter in you and me and your cat, your dog, and your trees. And this jump from this level to that level has brought something new into the process. It has brought life. A cell becomes a living organism. And so when you look at this diagram in front of you, as you move further, we say that things, more properties that were unpredictable from previous levels emerge. And emergence today is a big thing, ladies and gentlemen. So I could take you from here and break you down to your atoms. So physics underlies everything. But once we become mind and consciousness, we don't think of our electrons when we fall in love. We don't even feel them. But it's them, it's their activity that is actually taking place below the surface. So cells make organs like the liver, the stomach, the colon, even the brain. And these organs then get together to form organ systems. And so today we're talking about the gut as a system. So if you look at it, many organs, from the mouth to the esophagus, to the liver, to the stomach, right down to the anus, make this system which we call the gut. So the gastrointestinal tract, or the gut, is a system made of many organs which work together in harmony to actually perform some functions. And what are those functions? Digestion. That's what we've learned in school. They break down food, the gut breaks down food into smaller fragments. Absorption. Digested material is moved through mucosa into the blood. And elimination. Unabsorbed and secreted waste. Now, in the standard medical textbooks, these here are much spoken about, digestion and absorption. Elimination was never really spoken about and just referred to by the statement, waste is eliminated through the anus. But elimination has become a big issue these days, but we won't have time to talk about it today. Okay? And I learned my physiology through the textbook by this man, Guyton. It was a wonderful textbook. And I want to pay a tribute to him. But in life, things change. And we've really moved on from ordinary structure and function to higher issues, which have a philosophy behind them. And I hope when I leave you today, you will appreciate that philosophy. And what amazes me, that it's all happened in my one lifetime. Because this man came on the scene in about 1997. His name is Michael Gershon. He's from the University of Columbia, and he wrote this remarkable book, The Second Brain, Your Gut Has a Mind of Its Own, which was something that was never ever thought about when I was a student. Gut having a mind? Never. And then Julie Enders of Germany writes this book in about 2015, The World of Microbes. These new elements are coming into the gut. As knowledge advances, as techniques advance, new and cleverer people come into the field, they discover more and more things. And that's the beauty of nature. That's what Einstein says. You look at a problem, and the minute you think you've solved it, it raises 100 different questions. And he said that the good man upstairs won't yield the secrets of the universe that he has created easily. So here we are, a piece of steak for breakfast. It has the constituents of the body that the body requires for energy and reconstruction. Sorry about this irritation. So now this piece of steak contains everything that you're made of. So if I had a bite of one of you, this is what I would be having. Now, to break down that steak into absorbable nutrients, you need the gut. You're not going to get very much benefit if you crush that steak and give it to yourself in a drip. That would be useless. From the minute it enters the mouth, the chewing and the mechanical digestion begin. And you move your mouth, the saliva has in it a whole lot of enzymes and lipids and all sorts of things. And you move your mouth and your saliva mixes with it until you've chewed that piece of steak to a certain extent. You send it down the esophagus and you enter the stomach. Now, my field of speciality is the stomach, and around the question of why does the stomach not digest itself? Because the stomach chews the food, it chums the food, it has pepsin, it has such strong acid in it that it could burn a hole through your skin. But it doesn't digest itself because a layer of mucus protects the stomach wall. And that's my field, ladies and gentlemen. I've been trained as a mucus biochemist, and if you invite me again, I'll tell you all about that fascinating substance. The liver gets involved by helping to secrete bile, which comes from the gallbladder, and then the food leaves the stomach. By the time that piece of steak has left, it's fluid, and it goes and continues its way through to the small intestine, where the absorption of the nutrients and that absorption of your proteins and your carbohydrates and your lipids, which you require for energy and for reconstruction of the body, takes place here. But they're broken down to the building blocks. And what is not broken down is then eliminated as waste. All these organs work in harmony in one system to actually provide you with energy and material for reconstruction while you're alive. Okay, so this gut is producing energy for the entire body. Can the brain cope with the monitoring of this function? Because the brain, we know, is the seat of the soul and the seat of the body, and it has a link with every part of the body. So we were led to believe that the brain controls the function of every organ system in the body. But today we will learn that that's not entirely true. But we didn't give the gut a chance, ladies and gentlemen. Who would love the gut? Michael Gershon asks. Now, I was the Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town during the protests, and we had roads must fall. But people have been shouting for years, the gut must fall. It's not a kind of organ system that will make the pulse race. No poet would write an ode to the intestine. The colon is a repulsive piece of anatomy. Its shape is nauseating, its content disgusting, and it smells bad. It is primitive, slimy, snake-like thing. Its body lies coiled within the belly and it slithers when it moves. In brief, the gut is despicable and reptilian, unlike the brain from which wise thoughts emerge. Then why is the gut thought of as the second brain? So it provides energy for the entire body, including the brain. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is an enormous task, right? So you have to give it credit for that, first and secondly. And it does have a connection with the brain. If you look at this diagram, that's part of the central nervous system, the brain sitting on top. It has vagus nerves, which actually lead to the stomach and lead to other parts of the gut. So there's a nerve supply to the gut. Now, what happened in the early days, ladies and gentlemen, before the advent of all these medications that we have for things like gastric ulcers? Gastric ulcer is a common disease. It happens in the gut. It's very uncomfortable, very painful. You can lose a lot of blood. And it was very hard to cure. At that time, they used antacids to neutralize the acid, because the feeling was that acid caused the ulcers, which is another thing that has now completely changed in my lifetime. Anyway, so those ulcers, if they were intractable, if they couldn't be cured by medication, they were called refractory ulcers. What the doctors did is they actually severed or cut off this vagus nerve from the brain to the stomach. And you know what happened, ladies and gentlemen? It didn't affect the gut function. The gut carried on functioning. The gut was now functioning with hardly any contact with your brain. That was marvelous. The brain can affect the behavior of the bowel, but the gut can manage to get along without the brain, says Michael Gershon. And yet after vagotomy, there is still a connection between the gut and the brain. What is that connection? So, can the brain cope with monitoring the enormous task that the gut undertakes to provide the body with energy? Because the brain is different. The brain has neurons. It's made of neurons. The gut is made of completely different types of cells. Okay? But if the gut is the second brain, then does it have neurons? And does it have neurotransmitters? That are those chemicals that you find in the brain which help carry thought from one neuron to another. Now here's a neuron. Here's a neuron, and those are its dendrites and its body, and that's its axon. And so a nerve impulse will enter there, or a thought will enter there. It will be carried along the axon. It will go right down to the axon terminal and end off in these little bulbs here. What are those bulbs? Well, those bulbs are this here. They are packets called synaptic vesicles, and in them are the neurotransmitters. So if the instruction is for this nerve to stimulate another nerve, or for this nerve to take its information and transfer it to the next nerve, it will secrete neurotransmitters, which actually then cross this barrier, carry on here, and get converted into a nerve impulse again, and the thought will be carried on until you realize the thought when it reaches its destination. So that's where we are. Oh, this is such a pest. Anyway, so that's how nerves work. And we have a human nervous system. Here is the brain. That's the spinal cord. That's the central nervous system. And everything else that radiates out of this central nervous system to the remotest part of your body is called the peripheral nervous system. Now, in that peripheral nervous system, there is an autonomic nervous system. One is called a parasympathetic and the other is sympathetic. Now, I don't want you to absorb all this. I'm just showing you how complex it is. And they work against each other. So if the parasympathetic stimulates activity of the stomach, the sympathetic will inhibit activity of the stomach, right? But now we are saying that the gut seems to carry on without the involvement of the central nervous system, the brain. Why? because the gut has its own rich nerve supply. The enteric nervous system can function without messages from the central nervous system. That is absolutely fascinating, ladies and gentlemen. And then I spoke to you about two plexuses, Auerbach and Meissner's, which I showed you are found in those layers of the gut, and that's what you need to know. Okay, so this enteric nervous system, they call it enteric because the gut is a tube, and enteric means tube or cavity. It can escape the functional hierarchy. It may be lumped into the category of the peripheral nervous system, but no, it's too important and independent for that. It does not necessarily follow commands it receives from the brain or spinal cord, nor does it send back information it receives to itself. Okay, so consider that. The first thing is that the gut can act independently of the brain. The second law, the law of the intestine, is called peristalsis. Ladies and gentlemen, when you took that food into your mouth, that gut, as I said, all its organs working in harmony, from mouth to anus, ensure that that food moves only in one direction. It mustn't come up again. It's going to go down because eventually its nutrients are going to be broken down and absorbed into your bloodstream to reach all parts of your body like oxygen does from the lungs. Now, for that to happen, you have to have peristalsis, a series of involuntary wave-like muscle contractions which move food along the digestive tract. Okay, and the property of peristalsis is the pressure-induced activity of the gut. It occurs without the involvement of the CNS. This is also a remarkable finding that if I cut off a piece of your gut and left it on a table for a while, peristalsis will continue. That is amazing. Due to the local nervous mechanism, because it has such a rich nerve supply, it can work in isolation. It's been shown now for over 100 years, and no other organ has this property. And this intrinsic nervous system of the gut actually has properties that are like those of the brain. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Gershon asked who would love the gut. Somebody suddenly realized the bowel is close to God. Okay, so the gut has its own nervous system. As it evolved, it became more complex and developed at the same pace as the brain. This enteric nervous system, now this is very important, has more than 100 million nerve cells, more than or the same as the spinal cord. And those nerve cells of the esophagus and the intestine and the large intestine, and you have more than the peripheral nervous system. So now we can talk about a gut-brain axis because the gut has risen in status and it can tell the brain, I don't need you all the time. I don't need you most of the time. I have my own nerve supply. But the story doesn't end there, okay? Because evolution's trick on our predecessors, which emerged from the primeval ooze and acquire a backbone, was to give them a brain in the head and a gut with a mind of its own. So the brain had its own priorities: cognition, to understand things in this universe, to write sonnets, to actually discover the genome. Those are things the brain does. The gut is important because it supplies the brain with energy. But then you ask, if you have these nerve cells in the gut, and if you're likening the gut to the brain anatomically, what about those neurotransmitters I spoke about? Does the gut have them? Well, let's look. Are there neurotransmitters in the enteric nervous system? And that was the turning point. That question, ladies and gentlemen, was the turning point in Michael Gershon's career, because he found that there was serotonin in the gut. He says, my own introduction to the second brain came slowly and indirectly. It began with a love affair, not with the bowel or my wife, but with serotonin. And I never suspected that a neurotransmitter encountered during a course in physiology could lead me to the gut. You know what, ladies and gentlemen? He found that 90% of serotonin resides in the gut, not in the brain. And I hope that has sunken in, and I hope you're all cartwheeling in your lounges, because this is amazing stuff. And so if you look at the gut, as you move down it, you will find cells in the gut which secrete serotonin. They have used these beautiful pictures and dyes to show that serotonin is all over the gut, all over the gut. So there are serotonin pathways in the brain, and they act to keep you alive. They help you to think. They help you to love. But that serotonin is made in the gut. Okay? And now, in fact, it's not only serotonin, even dopamine, which functions for reward, pleasure, motor function, compulsion, preservation, and serotonin for moods, memory, processing, sleep, cognition. Those are produced in the gut. 50% of your dopamine comes from the gut, and 95% of your serotonin comes from your gut. So let's see. People looking at this are wondering what is happening. So here's Mark Light. He's an endocrinologist, okay, and he's been looking at the gut. What he does is he collects monkey poo. You won't believe what we are extracting out of poo, he says. The gut has vast quantities of microbiota. Now, when you talk about microbiota, you're talking about bacteria, organisms like that, and other organisms like viruses and fungus. What are they doing in the gut? And if they're there, should they be there? Because usually we were told that anything that's bacterial is harmful to the gut. So there are 2.7 kilograms of microbes in our guts, making up this microbiome that we have. And we need sugar to keep them healthy. Please don't say that to Tim Noakes. And gut microbes communicate with the nervous system using the same neurochemicals that relay messages in the brain. That is why you have neurotransmitters in the gut. But now, we are, at least from the standpoint of DNA, more bacterial than human. Why? Because this human microbiome project showed that there are psychoactive compounds in feces of infant monkeys. And these gut microbes communicate with the nervous system using these neurochemicals that relay messages in the brain. Then want to transfer microbes from one monkey to another to see how the neurodevelopment is affected. And this has an enormous advantage over surgical procedures, because when you have a problem with your gut and you undergo surgery, it's a huge operation. But if you get to know your gut microbes better, then you would have easier ways to deal with gut problems. Okay. Now, Mark Light has published this paper in PLOS One. He says these microbial pathogens in the brain cause behavioral changes, but the microbes in the gut influence behavior in a non-invasive manner through production of neurochemicals that are identical to the ones in the brain. Perhaps we need to modulate the gut-brain axis to treat mental disease. But we all, and this from our genetic revolution, share a common microbiota. So all of us, the whole of humanity, has a core of these bacteria in our guts, which are common to all of us, independent of gender, race, age, and geography. 75% of the species are common to more than 50% of individuals. 57 species of these microbes are common to more than 90% of individuals. There are two types which are conserved because they perform important functions and they predominate in all individuals. The main one is bacteroidetes for energy production, amino acid transport, and carbohydrate metabolism. And there's another species called firmicutes for carbohydrate and vitamin metabolism. So they are there to help you, not to harm you. And the functional core that we all have helps in breaking down the sugars that is part of that steak. They synthesize essential fatty acids, which is very important. And they are a source of essential amino acids. Amino acids make your protein. And you have 20 different amino acids. Only 10 are made in the body. The rest come from your diet. But now it's known that these microbes can make them for you. So lucky you, you can have good proteins. So the source of this microbial species, where did you get it from? From your mother. The baby is exposed in the vaginal canal of the mum during birth. There's a postnatal exposure to it. The nurse picks you up, the doctor picks you up. You get some of that microbes into you. If you have a cesarean section, it could result in exposure to other sources. And this has implications of health in adulthood. That is why they even more emphasize now that you have a vaginal delivery. Then your home, your hygiene, your ward environment, your breast, whether you're breastfeeding or bottle, whether you're breastfed or bottle fed, the water you drink, the food, all those issues then add to your microbial species. By the age of 3, you have all your microbes. Okay? And your microbiota is unique. Unique like an individual fingerprint. The microbiota family members are more similar than unrelated individuals. Monozygotic twins have identical microbiota, but with slight changes. Genes are who we are, that's our nature, but so is how we live, our nurture. So these gut microbes are essential for health and survival. Germ-free animals, if you make a germ-free animal that has no germs at all, they have all kinds of difficulty, nutritional, poor growth, they have a leaky gut, they have a defective immune system, they can die if you introduce a pathogen to them, and they don't make antibodies. And you know how important antibodies are. You've been following the COVID saga. And they have an altered neurochemical production and brain development. So it seems like these gut microbes are central to your good health. Okay? And bacterial populations can change in an individual. As you age, you use too many antibiotics. Anti-cancer drugs like tamoxifen and the blood pressure drug like minoxidil can increase the toxicity of some of these bacteria. And of course, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Those of us who have arthritis, and sulfasalazine, those of us who have Crohn's disease, they can protect against harmful species, and bacteria in turn can produce enzymes and alter structure of some drugs and prevent their mode of action. So we have reached the age of beneficial bacteria. Up to this point, we thought bacteria were harmful and that we have to be very, very particular about our hygiene habits. But today, we're not shunning bacteria anymore. Scientists have found that certain species play a crucial role inside our bodies. And they play a huge role in making us fat or thin, happy or sad, diseased or healthy. And in the infant gut microbiome, probiotics can work. The infant gut is more malleable in the first 2 years after birth, allowing probiotics to make the mark. Can we exploit this to improve infants' health? Yes, sure we can. Because we now know that we are ecosystems. And as you move down the gut, Julie Enders in this wonderful book called Gut, she actually says the number of these gut microbes increase. And our guts are home to more than 1,000 species of bacteria, plus minority populations of viruses, yeast, fungi, and other unicellular organisms. You don't want too many bacteria in the small intestine. Severe bloating, pain, nutrient deficiencies, joint pain, and anemia can be caused. But I am an ecosystem, she says. Our gut's microbiome can weigh up to 2 kilos, and contain about 100 trillion bacteria. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't have that number of cells that make you, but you've got more bacterial cells than what makes you a human. 1 gram of feces contains more bacteria than there are people on Earth. We are unaware of the spectacular surfing scenario that takes place in our nasal flora every time we sneeze. It would take an entire international news agency to report on all the events unfolding in just one person's microbiome. While we lounge about feeling bored, any number of exciting things are happening inside us, and it's in the large intestine that where they are, and they produce a slew of compounds. There are 1,200 different species. They produce toxins that cause inflammation and are associated with heightened heart disease if you have the wrong one, heart disease risk to critical vitamins, the mood regulating hormone serotonin. Ladies and gentlemen, how many times you've been told that you're depressed because you have a deficiency in serotonin? If you have the right bacteria, they would produce the serotonin for you, and compounds that suppress hunger and reduce glucose and insulin levels in the blood. So here we are, the gut, and we need to eat the proper food to feed them. There are 3 main types, enterotypes of bacteria in the gut. They are Bacteroides, Prevotella, and Ruminococcus. They're different because they break down food in different ways. They produce different substances and detoxify specific harmful substances and not others. Now, they have enzymes. We have enzymes in our body. These bacteria have enzymes too, which actually break down your proteins, break down your fat, help you with the digestion. These enzymes that break down complex carbohydrates and extract these even from meat and produce lots of calories. So there you are. They cause an increase in weight. Does having them in our guts make us fat, or does being fat lead them to be in our guts? But they are more common in people who have a high fat intake. Then the other class, Bacteroides, produce biotin, which is not produced by our cells. And that includes vitamin B7 and vitamin H, which neutralizes avidin, a toxin in raw eggs. This vitamin H gives us healthy looking skin, hair, nails. It's an enormous benefit to us. It helps in metabolic processes. It helps to synthesize certain foods. And if you have a biotin deficiency, so if you don't have this particular kind of bacteroides in your gut, you can have depression, lethargy, neurological disorders, increased cholesterol levels, and susceptibility to infections. These bacteria in the gut help us stay alive. Prevotella is another one. It's more common in vegetarians, and it produces thiamine, like B1, which keeps nerves flourish, coats your nerves in an insulating layer of fat. And the deficiency of it can cause muscle tremors, forgetfulness, and beriberi, which we noticed when Jan van Riebeeck and others came via our Cape. And then there was B. infantis, a subspecies of Bifidobacterium longan. And this one comes in the form of a probiotic called EVC001. And people who take it, B. infantis, causes a reduction in levels of pathogenic bacteria. And as a probiotic, it lessens the degradation of your mucus, which is very important. And it has fewer micro-antibiotic resistance genes. And if it's given to you during breastfeeding, your levels remain elevated for up to a year after treatment. Okay, so levels are far more elevated than formula-fed infants. So in this 2017 study by people from Harvard, breastfed babies, give them this probiotic of a specific strain of this bacterium, results in a 10 million fold average increase in levels of these bacteria in your poo. That means these bacteria are there to benefit you, and the excess is pooed out. So, and for survival in the gut, this particular bacterium, right, feeds on human milk oligosaccharides. They can feed on those, or they can feed on the sugars that mucus supplies. So mucus is not only a protective barrier, it even produces food, even produces carbohydrates to keep this bacterial population healthy. Now, for me, this is a huge thing because while I'm studying the gut-brain axis, mucus, which I've been working on for years and years and years, suddenly comes into the picture. And so these microbiota produce an enzyme which cuts off these bonds and produces galactose and glucose and other normal sugars from your mucus bacteria. And if the mucus bacteria is compromised through bad diet, you're going to get inflammation and infection. So, ladies and gentlemen, these bacteria need to be kept at the right species. They need to be fed, right? You can increase them with certain probiotics, especially in breastfed infants. You can increase them with certain probiotics. I don't know all the names of those. I'm not a probiotic man. To keep the population alive and healthy. And that could contribute to your better health. Okay? So the intestinal mucus layer manages these bacteria. So the thick mucus layer of the gut provides a barrier to infiltration of the underlying epithelia by both the normal microbes and the enteric pathogens. Some members of these microbiota utilize these mucus glycoproteins as a nutrient source, but that is still being studied. And then what is the link between serotonin and depression? Well, they say if you have too little serotonin in your brain, you become depressed. And then to actually increase that supply, you have to take things like Prozac, the happiness pill. Now, microbes produce serotonin in the gut. It's a well-known brain neurotransmitter, but as I said, 90% of it is produced in the gut. Now, altered levels of this serotonin have been linked to diseases such as irritable bowel syndrome, cardiovascular disease, and osteoporosis. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. So new research at Caltech, published in the journal Cell, showed that certain bacteria in the gut are important for the production of this serotonin. Even more interesting is that these bacteria can make them. Much of the body's serotonin is produced by them, and our work demonstrates that microbes normally present in the gut stimulate host intestinal cells to also produce serotonin. And I showed you those diagrams. So, how do the gut bacteria affect the brain? These microorganisms in the gut secrete substances similar to the ones used by neurons to communicate and regulate mood, right? The serotonin, dopamine, gamma aminobutyric acid, all these important neurotransmitters are produced in the gut. They play a role in intestinal disorders which coincide with anxiety and depression. Certain bacteria in feces are found in feces are associated with depression. This is my friend, very good friend of mine, Anthony Caulfield. Why I like Anthony very much is whenever we met at a conference overseas, he carried an extra bottle of shampoo and toothpaste because he knew I would forget mine. And he has found these bacteria in the oral cavity, in the stomach, and an abundance of them in the colon, and he has named them. He works in Bristol, in England. So he drew one of these diagrams. So that's now you walking through your gut, ladies and gentlemen, and that's your gut wall, like I showed you before. And these microbes are sitting there, and the mucus has to be strong to prevent these microbes that are helping you, but they shouldn't get into your gut wall and get into your blood, because then you've got problems, because then they turn toxic. So you must always have a very good supply of mucus, which also traps a lot of defense molecules, and it has got sugars which will catch. The mucus has sugars which will catch any of these before they go down and harm the wall of your gut. Okay, so remember, that's why mucus has come in. And also, these bacteria can feed on the sugars that are part of the mucus. Now, sometimes your mucus strength can diminish, okay, and it can become weak. So you can see now that if you have a fiber-rich diet, you've got a strong mucus layer. You've got these bacteria, they can't enter, but they can feed off the mucus, and they can help you, and they can produce all your antidepressive chemicals and whatever else you need, fatty acids, vitamins. They can do that, and they can stay alive by feeding on the mucus, but they mustn't enter and compromise the gut wall. If you have a fiber deficient diet, right, then these can your mucus strength decreases, then you're going to start getting a leak. And you can get diseases like colitis, depending on the type of bacteria that actually gets through this weak mucus barrier and causes intestinal inflammation. So keep your mucus barrier strong and keep your bacterial populations alive. Okay. Now, a weak gut microbiome. Say you have bad populations of microbes in your gut population. It is linked to more, in fact, recently it's been shown, it is linked to more severe COVID-19. So imbalances in gut bacteria could be associated with more severe cases of COVID-19. Some patients who were hospitalized due to the illness had less helpful bacteria and more harmful bugs compared to healthy people. About 1 in 10 COVID-19 patients experienced GI symptoms, according to initial estimates, and even more shed the virus in their poop. Now, this virus is so unpredictable. It can affect your lungs. It can cause clots. It can go to your brain. It can affect your kidneys. It causes black toenails. And it also affects the gut. And it's different in different people. More research needs to be done to explore this link, but it could lead to gut-based therapies for COVID-19. So let's go back to Simon Carding. The gut is packed full of bacteria. We know that. He's reminding you that there may be no actual butterflies in your stomach, but there are 100 trillion microorganisms. Collectively, they're known as the microbiome. It's increasingly clear that this microbiome influences mental and physical health. And now scientists are taking this topic a step further and linking this microbiome to the likelihood of certain personalities. So he swallowed a little camera to see what was happening in his gut. And he said that it is important to have this mutualistic relationship between the colonic microbiota and the metabolic products, right? And what a good microbe population is good for is homeostasis. You don't want dysbiosis. You don't want a population of bacteria that are harmful. You want a good population of bacteria. Otherwise, you're going to get colon cancer, you're going to get depressed, and you're going to have all kinds of problems in your gut. And he coined this term dysbiosis. That is when your bacteria in your gut are harming you because they're not of the right population, or they're not enough of the right population. They can cause inflammatory bowel disease and celiac disease, that's hypersensitivity to gluten. It can cause allergies, asthma, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease. So Carding says this makeup of bacteria is selected to a large extent by the food we eat and our behavior in the environment. In turn, the bacteria, by influencing how our body works, influence our appetites and food preferences. Migrating populations show the importance of diet in the makeup of bacteria. Fasting reduces microbial diversity, feeding increases, and there are many probiotics that you can take to help produce some of the neurochemicals that you might need. And your good diet, yogurt, is nothing other than milk pre-digested by bacteria. Lactose is broken down to lactic acid in yogurt. 114 Canadians were given yogurt which had in it a bacterium, this particular one, Lactobacillus reuteri, resistant to digestion twice a day for 6 weeks. Bad LDL cholesterol was reduced by 8.9% when they gave this yogurt. Half the improvement attained by taking a mild anti-cholesterol drug without the side effects. Other type of bacteria lowered the cholesterol by 11 and 30%. So bacteria with bile salt hydroxylase, BSH genes, are being investigated as cholesterol lowering factors. So a stable diet, there's a seaweed diet in Japan which actually helps when that seaweed is digested. The genes that originate from aquatic bacteria when you consume seaweed are acquired by your gut, and they have health properties like detoxification, weight loss, cholesterol lowering. Those are positive reinforcement. Okay, and then they can alter the host behavior and health by metabolic activities, by growth of cells, by blood coagulation. They can make neurotransmitters for you. They can affect your sleep and mood. They can cure your bad breath. So the idea that to keep children very hygienic is now gone. We should actually help them. We should allow them to be free and to eat sand. I used to be horrified when my children put sand in the mouth in the garden, but that helps build a good immune system and helps build a good bacterial population in the gut. Kissing is very important because you can exchange healthy microbes by kissing. So when this COVID pandemic is over, please, I advise you to go back to kissing. And then your gut microbes, if you eat the proper food, lots of fruit, vegetables, and fiber, they're very small and you can pack a lot of them in. And where there are problems, if you have a bad population, then you might need a fecal transplant. Like this man here, he says, okay, doc, let me see. If I've got this right, you want to put shit up my ass to cure my diarrhea and my food addictions and allergies? But it works in treating gut infection, and very well too. More effective than antibiotics in treating some of the bacterial infections. So finally then, does the gut have feelings? If we said that the brain, we feel with the brain. The ugly gut is more intellectual than the heart and may have a greater capacity for feeling. Now, this young lady, Sandra Blakeslee, wrote an article in the New York Times which said complex and hidden brain in the gut makes stomach aches and butterflies. Now, when you're falling in love or when you are thinking of doing something wrong, like stealing from your friend, where do you weigh the scenarios in your head and you think, well, I'll lose my friend for good. My family will think badly of me. Those are bad feelings that you'd feel. But where would you feel them? You'd feel them in your gut, not in your brain. If you're falling in love and you have a good feeling, you feel them in your gut. So the reasons for these common experiences, the familiar one, say it is that the body has two brains. The familiar one encased in the skull and the lesser known one, but vitally important one in the gut. Like Siamese twins, the two brains are interconnected. When one gets upset, the other does too. Ladies and gentlemen, the study of the gut is now coming into the realm of neuroscience because it's the second brain, right? It can work without the brain. It has nerve cells. It has a rich nerve supply. It produces neurotransmitters. Then it has a population of bacteria that also does those things to help its function. Okay. And so I spoke to you, they're talking now about the somatic marker hypothesis. This is one of the world's leading neuroscientists, Antonio Damasio. And he says, when you're anxious and worried, you feel it in your gut. So the gut-brain axis today is a fact of life. It also has one important component, which is mucus, which is important for me. So fix your gut and fix your brain. Okay, so there's the first brain. Here is the second brain. And the bacteria in the gut have a direct line to the brain because they produce chemicals which get to the brain. And Daniel A. Musida says that the pace of research now in gut bacteria is growing. And there's a remarkable degree of communication between our nervous system and the microbiota in the gut. It may also have implications for treating GI conditions. And yet, with apology, gut matters are entrenched in our language. We humans have always known what science is discovering now. We are cleverer than the scientists. Our gut feeling is responsible for a huge measure of how we feel. And we say it in our daily conversations. I'm scared shitless, pooing in my pants for fear. I cannot get my ass into gear. We swallow our disappointment. We need time to digest the defeat. A nasty comment leaves a bad taste in the mouth, and we get butterflies in the stomach when falling in love. Ladies and gentlemen, the gut has risen. The renaissance of the gut. When the gut rises to the level of conscious perception in the form of heartburn, cramps, diarrhea, constipation, no one is enthused. But when we fall in love, we feel happy in the gut. The brain can affect the behavior of the bowel, but the gut can also manage to get along without hearing from the brain. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. If you invite me again, I'll talk to you about mucus. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Mall, giving us some of your time today for such an interesting and informative talk. This is when you realize your second brain is more intelligent than your first brain. There's a few minutes left for questions that some of you have posed. You can still ask a question in the right-hand chat area of the screen, should you so wish. So the first question, is the reason that some animals eat excreta?
Okay, I think that's true. Yeah, sorry, I've read it. So I think that's true if it reads, if it eats the right kind of excreta. So if that excreta has a decent population of gut, of bacteria, it could supplement it could supplement the population of the animal that's eating it. Sorry about that, Richard. I jumped. Okay. Next one. Yes, I think that is true. I think you get a lot of positive messages from the gut to the brain, simply because the gut makes the brain chemicals and probably supplies the brain when those chemicals are in short supply or at other times when you need a positive reinforcement. Bile. Bile causes your feces to be of a yellow color. That's why. And that bile is made in the liver, which has a whole biliary system. And then it's transported down to the gallbladder, where it's stored. And then from the gallbladder, it enters the intestine. Now, bile salts play a very important role in the digestion of fat. And what's left over colors your feces. And that's why mainly your feces are yellow. I'm answering that with a lot of caution. Do we need to eat more sugar to help grow our bacteria? Ooh, I used to teach with Tim Noakes, and Tim Noakes and I remained friends for a long time. But our relationship is a bit shaky at the moment because I've questioned some of his ideas about sugar. But according to the papers, the sugar that you take in, if you're eating the right type of food, I'm not talking about eating refined sugar. The right kind of food in which there are complex carbohydrates, like in fruit and vegetables. That sugar would be enough to actually help the bacteria grow. And then don't forget that if you're not getting enough from your diet, you're getting sugar, the bacteria are getting sugars from the mucus. Because the mucin molecule, which forms the mucus gel on the surface of your gut to protect it, is 80% sugar. Oh, please invite me. I've spent my life studying mucus, and I have a lot to tell you. I'll accept your invitation gladly. Eat the right food. Ensure that you're not regularly constipated. They're just very basic things. I think what has happened, one professor in England did an experiment. He was very, very good about his family and himself eating a healthy diet. He did an experiment with his son. He put his son on fast foods for a certain period of time. Every day he had burgers, chips, and whatever, all these sauces that they give you with its additives in it. And then he looked at his gut microbiome and he found that he had wiped out some very crucial populations of the bacteria. So we should be careful in what we eat. I think everyone's tired. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope I was clear, and I hope you could actually hear me. I just want to say to the audience that I gave a series of 5 lectures at the summer school on this topic. What I did today is I tried to condense those 5 lectures into one lecture. It wasn't easy because for me, every slide was important. But if I had included all the slides, you might have had about 350 slides to sit through. So I was being very cautious there. I think medicine is going in that direction. In fact, I'll take it one step further. Your microbiota population is unique. So you have a core species that is common to all humanity, and then you have a fingerprint species because your life is different from the life of your child or your parent. So you have a unique population of microbiota suited for your body. And that's one step towards personalized medicine, because that's the way medicine is going, personalized medicine. I'm going to be very honest here. I can't answer that question. I haven't studied dietetics or any such thing, and I'm not a clinician. So I do get questions from time to time. Sometimes I'm able to answer them because I've done the reading, but generally I wouldn't know questions about the differences between different foods, kind of thing. Again, I can't, except that my mother always told me I should always have some honey because it was good for me. But other than that, I can't. Sorry about that. I'm not so sure about the paleo diet because we're living in the modern world. We eat a lot of refined food, I know, but I think there are ways out of the situation. And you know, you got to remember that food that's not cooked also contain a lot of substances that could be harmful to us. So I'm relying on the dietitians to create the perfect diet. Now, again, that's a very clinical question. And I won't be able to answer that. You have to speak to a neurologist about that. I don't know what biologics are, but Crohn's is part of the inflammatory bowel syndrome. And apparently it's been treated very well by sulfasalazine. I remember at one time, when you had an inflammatory bowel disease like ulcerative colitis, you had to have surgery. In fact, somebody very close to me died from ulcerative colitis. Today it's not so bad because it's treatable, but there's no cure for these inflammatory bowel diseases. They're manageable.
Well, that seems to be all the questions. So that's great and concludes today's presentation. Thanks again to Professor Mall.
Thank you for having me.
Wednesday, the 7th of April at 10 a.m, when the speaker will be medical doctor Joan Lawrence, who now lives in Neisner. Her topic will be A Wilder Life of Adventure Medicine, and will no doubt include some of her wild work in the Australian outback and elsewhere. I don't think it's about glamping. Sounds intriguing? So please join us then. So for today, goodbye from U3A Helderberg.